see staffing cuts, right? You see firefighters, young ones get laid off. You get young police officers laid off. You get teachers laid off. I mean, it's a reality empire. I mean, the very things that they say they want to prevent by kind of keeping the status quo will actually accelerate because, again, everything's dependent on taxpayers raising taxes on themselves when they're already feeling it's too high, they're losing value in their property, they haven't got a raise in the private sector in a couple of years. So it's going to create a greater fiscal crunch if we can't control these costs. And that's one of the worst things that can actually happen. If we just kind of get common sense here and say, look, we just can't afford the cost structure, just realign it. That $7.6 billion deficit I told you about, the 613 school districts? We ran a 10% package cut for every single one of them, just as to see what it looked like, what would it impact it would have. And what we did is we said, if you reduce the compensation package by 10% today, so that's a combination of pay cut, a healthcare premium shift, pension shift, sick leave things like that. But the total reduction in yearly compensation is 10%. If you did that and then limited future year growth to 3.2%, so you're not saying you're not getting anything else for the rest of your life, we're going to limit it to 3.2%, which is the historical inflation rate in Ohio. That $7.6 billion deficit turns into $1 billion surplus. It's that significant of a swing by just a 10% reduction. Now, look, I know these guys out here, right, they don't want a 10% reduction. Nobody does, right? I didn't want a 34% reduction, but it was the right thing to do.
Melanie, I understand you have some examples of how governments are already responding to these personnel cost crises. Maybe you can talk about that.
Just a few quick examples. Excuse me. The city of Cleveland reported that they would be cutting 321 city employees. 123 of those would be in safety forces. That's very significant. I know the city of Cleveland employs thousands and thousands of people, but for those city employees, if we were one of the 321 people losing their job, you can't have it both ways. If you can't afford and you can't change what you can't afford, then people lose jobs, which is much more serious than a reduction in pay of a percentage. It's a reduction in a whole job for those folks. City of Huber Heights, and I forgot that you were going to be here tonight. I forgot about the Huber Heights connections. I didn't intentionally use this as an example, but Huber Heights City Schools are cutting 46 staff members. 46 people, most of those would be collective bargaining contracts. 46 people are losing their job just in that school district alone. Lancaster and Mansfield, there are cities who are not the big 8 urbans. There are municipalities and townships that are just struggling. These are just a few examples. Before I hand the mic back to Seth, I want to sort of finish the example I started a few minutes ago with the gentleman who was going to get a reduction in his payback or buyback of his sick time. I can't remember if I mentioned it, but I want to make sure I do. His bonus check, because his salary is in the neighborhood of $103,000 a year, his bonus check, based on that 1,000 hours capped, because he makes over $51 an hour, is going to be $51,000. And the comment that he made in the email to us is he thought that the change in Senate Bill 5 was mean-spirited, because he's going to be, that amount for that piece alone was going to be $12,000 less than what he would have gotten. $51,000 bonus check, and he still thinks SB 5 is mean-spirited. Something's got to give.
And I think a worthy comment at this point regarding these layoffs that you just mentioned, the 46 teachers. This was right after Huber Heights had tried to pass a tax levy. This goes to Matt's point. The tax levy failed dramatically because they tried to pass the tax levy right after they had passed a tax levy just 12 months earlier to build a bunch of new buildings. Then they came back and asked for an income tax, which was going to fund operations. When they couldn't get that through the public because we're already we're not super high compared to other cities around us, but especially at the school level, we pay a fair share of taxes. So then they go in and lay off 46 teachers. That's a 100% reduction, to your point, for 46 of them. And under the current statute, the way those layoffs would occur would be the last in, first out. So no matter how good that young teacher was, you're out. No matter how bad the teacher was that's been around for 20, 30 years, it's gained tenure in Ohio law, which a lot of people don't know, that after 5 years, teachers, without getting themselves in trouble, gain tenure. Very difficult to get rid of them at that point. They're still in. So it not only has the impact of continuing a fiscal crisis, but also dealing with the quality of the schools overall. Dane, I just want to come to you real briefly. You already talked to this, but there's really, if these facts are correct, and they are, we've got a situation in our hands. We've got a layoff situation if the taxpayers continue to say, nope, not paying more taxes, or we do have an increase in tax situation in order to continue to fund those services at the contracted level. Talk just again, comment, remind the crowd what you said in your opening statement about the impact that you see that has on the private sector.
Yeah, you really did cover that people walk with their feet, or they walk away from taxes and regulation, and I really don't know what I can reiterate too much more, just maybe one interesting comment real quick. President Obama was here touting the bridge from Ohio to Kentucky. And I think all that bridge is going to do is further encourage people to move over to Covington and to commute. So little did he realize he's further increasing the brain drain and work drain from the state of Ohio. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, excellent. Again, I want to encourage you to get your questions to Rebecca. We're about to start taking them in particular. Matt, I'm going to come back to you just real quickly. Tell us about how Senate 5 will help the school system, in your view, if it's passed. Let's get to the positives of this. And maybe you can comment on some of the reforms that have happened in Wisconsin and the impact that that's had in Wisconsin.
I think it's really important to keep this in mind, right? No matter what happens on November 8th, what happens thereafter is actually equally important, from the sense that one of the problems, and I think this is one of the critics that the unions had and the Democrats in the House and Senate had of SB 5, was that essentially it was bailing out management from making dumb decisions. And I actually think that's totally right. The folks that go to that table to negotiate over the last 28 years have truly failed to represent taxpayers at the table. And when revenues were coming in, it was really easy to just kind of give away the bank, and there were no consequences to that. So now that we're in a fiscal crisis, globally, nationally, at the state level, the local level, that kind of generosity is kind of coming home to roost. And so if all you do is have more school board members or more city council or county commissioners or township folks or state reps who essentially continue that process, even if Issue 2 is there, bargaining over wages is still a subject of bargaining and safety issues. And if you just kind of say, which we've seen in some cases already in Ohio, which is, oh, okay, well, we made you cover 15% of your healthcare costs, and we did this and that, so what we'll do is we'll raise your pay to kind of replace that. Well, that doesn't answer the mail. That doesn't fix the problem. So it really takes the kind of political will going forward to really make sure that those folks are representing taxpayers at the table, which is what they're supposed to be doing, but they don't oftentimes. So what we've seen in Wisconsin, with all the hullabaloo about Wisconsin, is it's frankly saving jobs and it's balancing budgets. And so school districts in the post-implementation phase now that have negotiated contracts, what they've not had to lay off a single teacher. They've been able to balance budgets and not actually make any programmatic cuts. So it's allowing them to really do what they need to do to get their budgets aligned without getting rid of a single teacher or cutting any programs. So that's the early results out of Wisconsin. It's good, it's favorable, but Wisconsin's also an indicator of where that isn't the case, where again the folks at the table on the management side aren't representing taxpayers. They're doing what you would expect them to do, wanting to raise taxes and do all those types of things and not make the tough decisions. Nobody wants to make tough decisions. It's human nature to report conflict, right? We don't want to be the bad person. Nobody wants to play bad cop. It's never the fun thing to be. But again, we're in a fiscal crisis that requires that kind of responsibility in seriousness. So we've seen good things out of Wisconsin, but again, it takes that political will long after any vote happens on November.
If it's okay with the panel, we're going to go ahead and jump directly to the audience questions, because we've got a fair amount. So either we got really smart, or you got really stupid, or it's just a joke. And none of you are laughing at my jokes, which are horrifically awful tonight. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. I'm going to start with you, Melanie. The question is, what is the website that has the interview segments on it? That was what you mentioned in your opening statement. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you this question if you can answer it. Do public school teachers in Ohio retire with a yearly pension that is at least 75% of the year's final salary?
I think that, in answer to the second one, that depends on the school district. I don't know what the average is, I haven't done that research. But there is a point that needs to be made in terms of, if I could expand on what the question is asking in concept, the employment of teachers. There are some pieces of SB 5 that were put into the budget bill that is now already effective as of July 1st. The performance evaluation system, doesn't matter if SB 5 passes or not. That piece is, in fact, the timeline has been stepped up. The State Board of Education has to have a framework in place for local districts to use by December of this year, December 31st. So that piece is moving forward, whether or not, so if you're talking to friends and family who are teachers, and they're concerned about the performance evaluation piece of SB 5, it doesn't make any difference because that was pulled out and put into the budget bill anyway. That's going forward. I attended a meeting in August from some of the state school board members in the Department of Ed, and that piece actually has been worked on for a number of years now, so it's not a brand new idea that they're just jumping into. It's been in the process for quite some time. Oh, and the website is ivoters.com. It has fair questions, and both sides are asked to answer the exact same questions, and you can get a reflective viewpoint from both sides of issue 3, the pro side of issue 2, and as soon as the no side on issue 2 will sit down with us, we'll post that as well.
On the pension piece, the answer to that is likely no. It all depends on the teacher's years of service. If it's 30 years, then it's usually going to be around 66% of their pay in that final 3-year average. If they work longer than that, it could get up above 75%, but the vast majority, that's not the case. So you keep in mind, Senate Bill 5 has actually nothing to do with that. So that doesn't impact it at all. In terms of the pension issue, STRS, which is the teacher's pension, today has 58 cents for every dollar in liabilities. So for every dollar they owe, they have 58 cents to pay. Their own auditors have said that they cannot, if there are not significant reforms made, reforms mean cuts to future retirees' pensions, or the employer share gets jacked up, they cannot meet their obligations over the next 30 years. I mean, you could actually read that. It's a CAF called a CAFR CFR. You can actually read it for yourself. That all this stuff, people think I just make it up, but you can go read it, and it says it right there in the document. I think the one says they can't meet their liability to infinity, which is a long time.
Thanks, Matt. Just in regard to kind of stick to the pension theme, one of the questions is, does Senate Bill 5 address the issue of double dipping? And the answer to that is no. It really doesn't address much of the pension issue at all, except for the public pension pickup that Matt referenced earlier. The pension reform bill is expected to be heard. It's being technically heard right now in a committee called the Ohio Retirement Study Committee, but it's expected to be heard in front of the General Assembly sometime late this fall, if not early next year. So watch for that. It's going to be another big debate, I think, across the state. And Matt, I want to come back to you. The question from the audience is, comment on law enforcement personnel working overtime in the last 3 years to pump up their retirement.
Yeah, I mean, that's pay spiking. Then don't pick on law enforcement. I mean, that happens, in any kind of one of the government units. Happens in the state workers, because overtime is considered part of your highest 3 year. And so that's just one of the realities of the current system, that it applies to that 3 year average. So what happens is it's called pay spiking. They, get that high last 3 years, and it doesn't even have to be the last 3 years. There's a nurse in the state system. He averaged $200 grand a year over 3 years by working well over 100,000 in overtime, just in overtime, for 3 years. Doesn't matter now. He'll never make that in a single year in terms of his wage. So when he hits his magic number of 30 at age 52, he can retire and he'll have about $144,000 pension with the 3% COLA guarantee till he dies. So that issue is not just a law enforcement thing, it applies to the whole kind of government piece. So it's just a reality. And again, I would put that back on, hey, manage your force, right? Don't let folks get overtime, because it's going to be probably cheaper if you just added a police or state worker or whatever it might be, instead of letting folks double work that kind of overtime. So